Hello class, Chris here. I'm going to create another tutorial for this assignment 5-1, right? The practice simple ball bounce guidelines and rubric. So if we look through this, you should read this all on your own. Here for this video, I'm going to look at the directions here, right? So the objectives, complete the requirements stated in the practice task objectives, use the supplied model to create an animation, and what we're looking for you to submit is a playblast file of your animation. Okay. You may also submit the Maya scene, but at the very least, you need to submit the playblast video, and I'll show you how to do that. So it says use the tools for the practice assignment, right? Maya or 3ds Max. I will tell you now that Maya is definitely the industry standard for animation, not 3ds Max. So if you're very interested in animation, you should learn Maya and not bother with learning animation in Max. Okay. So you'll use the model rig, you'll set keyframes in the timeline, and then you're going to make sure that you're paying attention to weight, energy, using the principles of animation, realistic timing, not too fast or too slow, etc. Okay, so let's jump into this. And what you're going to want to do is download, click on one of these two links, right? This .max is for the 3ds Max, and this .ma is for Maya. I'm going to click on this .ma file to download it, right? And I'll open it in Maya. All right, so when you open this up, it looks like whoever created this created it in a student version of Maya. That's okay, we can still use it, but you'll probably get this warning, so I'll hit continue. And this is what it should look like, all right? So if you want to make sure your grid looks like mine, that might, you know, prevent future problems. So I'm gonna go to display and this little box by grid, here are my grid settings, right? So if you want to copy that, you can. Next, we need to set up Maya for animation. If you don't change the settings that I'm about to show you, then you'll run into problems and your animation won't look correct, okay? So the first thing we want to do is understand what our final output is going to be. I typically teach in 30 frames per second. 24 is also acceptable. But if you come down here to the bottom right corner and I click on this little icon, it's an animator running away from the sun is the joke. So right here, this opens up your settings preferences window. We've been here before to change some other things by going over here. But it will automatically go to this time slider setting, right? And here I can do a couple things. I can change the frame rate. So let's change it from 24 frames per second to 30 frames per second, okay? And then playback speed, make sure that this is not on play every frame. Play every frame will essentially play the animation as fast as your computer can play it. And it's likely that because the animation is so simple, and computers are very powerful now, that it will play super fast. What we want is 30 FPS by 1, okay? All right, so once you have that done, you can go ahead and hit save. Down here is the time slider, okay? And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go to workspace and change this to animation. And that's going to have, now the time slider looks a little bit different, right? And here we have the graph editor, which is helpful. Now, the assignment asks for us to create a bouncing ball animation that loops, right? Meaning that it loops seamlessly without any stutter or error. So it should just be a ball like hitting the ground, bouncing up and resetting over and over again. Actually, I just checked the assignment again, and it does not say it should loop, but I am going to create a looping animation here, okay? Just to get you used to doing that. All right. Down here, we have controls for how many frames are in our scene, right, in our animation. And right now, I want to work with 1 second, right? So I'm going to change this 150 to 30. And let's go ahead and change this to 30 as well, just to keep things a bit consistent. Now, when you animate, you typically animate a rig. You don't usually animate the mesh itself. The rig are these controls right here, right? And most bouncing ball rigs that I've seen only have, or one control because that's all they really need. This has three for some reason. Um, but regardless, we can still animate this. And before you animate, a good idea is to exercise the rig. That's a common thing that you'll do if you're an animator. And what that means is you select the controls, right? Um, one at a time, and you check out the channels, right? So every control is going to have a set of channels in the channel box, right? And these are the things that you can animate. In other words, key over time. So I can check these. This is the bottom one, the bottom control usually is called the super control. It's what will move and control the entire ball if you move it around. And then there are other controls elsewhere. This middle one looks like it's called ball bend, and we can key translations, in other words, movement. Note that we can't key rotation or scale, right? So if I hit E, see how this is grayed out? I can't actually rotate this, or R for scale. I can't scale it either, right? It's only, those are locked. So this top one is called ball squash stretch. So yeah, looks like we can adjust the squash and stretch on the ball with this by changing the translate Y value. What we want to be careful of is we don't want to, okay, so they do have constraints on this, which is good. We want to be careful about squashing and stretching this ball too much because we don't want loss of volume, right? That's the principle of solid drawing. So we don't want to lose or gain volume. So if it gets tall, it should get skinnier, which it is. And if it gets squashed, it should get shorter, which it is. So when you're using this control, I mean, this, if I were making this rig in the same way, I wouldn't have translate X or translate Y here, or translate X or Z. All we need is translate Y, moving up and down for squash and stretch. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and get started with this. We're going to work in a pose to pose method rather than straight ahead. Okay. And what this is going to allow us to do is focus on our timing first. Timing is the most important principle of animation. If your timing is not correct, then no matter what you do, your animation will not look correct. The principle after that is spacing. So we're going to start with timing, and then we'll move on to spacing. Okay, so let's go to frame one. I can click and drag in here on this gray box back and forth, right? And that's going to say, okay, at what frame is this on, right? So we have 30 frames per second. So this frames 1 through 30 represents 1 second. I'm going to make a looping animation where the ball takes 1 second to fall, hit the ground, bounce up, and then return to its starting point. I'm going to hit spacebar. And actually, I'm going to come over here to this 2 pane, click here, and this is good. I'm on this front Z and perspective, which is what I want. So if yours doesn't look like this, after clicking on this double pane over here, you can go to panels, orthographic, front, right? Here, panels, perspective, PERSP. I'll hit F and F to focus in. Then I'll zoom out a little bit. But anyway, let's go to tangents. Default in tangent, make sure that's set to spline for now. Default out tangent, make sure that's also set to spline. Okay. All right. So I'm going to select the bottom control and make sure I'm on frame 1, right? And I'm going to change the translate Y to 10 and hit enter. I can zoom out a little bit so I can see it. So I will right click on translate Y and hit key selected. Okay. Now we're working from pose to pose. So I know that at the start of the animation, it's going to be in translate Y10, right? I want this to loop. So at the end of the animation on frame 30, I also want it to be on 10, right? Notice that if I drag this off, if I'm on 1, this is red. If I move to any other frame, it turns to this sort of pink or salmon color. That color indicates that there's not a key on that frame, but there is a key in that channel somewhere in the animation. And in our case, it's on frame 1. In the graph editor, you can see this diamond here, and that signifies, oh, okay, well, here's frame 1, and there's a key on that frame, right? So let's go all the way to frame 30, and we're still at translate 10, and let's right-click key selected. So now I have 2 keyframes, and you can see in the graph editor, I now, here it is. And this graph editor is, we have movement in the Y, and along the X is time. So we have movement over time, right? This is a flat line representing that time is passing, right? In this case, 1 to 30, so 1 second. And the line is flat, meaning there's no motion, okay? Let's go to frame 15, which is halfway, right, between frame 1 and 30, and let's put it on the floor. So I'll go to translate Y, type in 0, hit enter. You can see now it's down on the bottom of the grid, and I will right-click, key selected. All right, now if I scrub through this, let's do it over here. If I scrub through this, you can see the ball is moving up and down, right? So this is a good start. Let's check out a couple things. In the graph editor, we can actually see movement over time now, right? So time is happening and there's a change of value in the Y. So, and this 10 represents the grid space, number 10, right? We went to 10, there's 10. And you can see that at frame 15, there's a frame right here and it's on 0, right? 0. So movement over time. If I hit play right here, we can watch it play through. Now that we have this, let's go ahead and do what I was trying to do earlier. Go ahead and select this bottom, the super, right? Then go to curves, pre-infinity, cycle, curves, post-infinity, cycle. And then let's also go to view and make sure infinity is checked. Now that we've done that, we can see if I zoom out by using the scroll wheel, you can see that it's going to repeat this over and over again. And we can kind of see how it blends into itself, right? So frame 30, when it repeats, it comes in here. So if I hit play, you can see, if I were to see this ball bouncing in real life, I would be like outside, on the sidewalk or something. It would be very bizarre. Be like, what is wrong with that ball, right? And the main issue, which I'm sure you can see, is that there's not proper ease in, ease out, meaning that at the peak, when we're at frame 10, it just starts to fall at a more or less consistent rate. And then when it reaches the ground, it kind of like slows down and then comes back up at a too consistent pace, right? So what should be happening is it should be the slowest when it's near the top, right? When it's starting to succumb to gravity, and it should be the quickest when it's at the bottom, when it's hitting the floor, okay? So we want to adjust this to get the timing better, or the spacing better. So let's make those changes. I'm going to make sure, again, I'm going to make sure I have this bottom control selected, right? If nothing is selected, I can't see my keys in here, right? Each control, if I had keys on that control, they would be independent in here. We can adjust the tangents of these keys. The tangents are essentially the handles that come off of either side of the key that control the curve in between here, right? So what I can do is I can take this key, and there are some shortcuts to adjust the tangents up here. But if I click on this, it says flat tangents. See how it straightens it out right there? And over here, let's also do the same thing, flat tangents. Let's try playing this now. So I'll hit play and check it out. All right, so now we have a pretty consistent looping up and down, right? The timing of it. However, it's not, the ease in, ease out is not correct. So let's go ahead and select this tangent right here, and I click and drag outside and then let go to select a key, right? If I were to move one of these handles independently, this is a tangent here, the way you can do that is you marquee over this and let go, like marquee select, click out here and let go, and then middle mouse click and drag and it will move it. I can move it up and down, right? However, if I move it up and down at the moment, notice that it's also moving the other side. It's changing the spacing of this. So if I hit play like this, see how now it drops through the floor and it completely changes it. So I'll undo that by hitting Z. I'm going to select this key, and I need to break the tangents so that I can manipulate them independently. So I'll come over here with this selected. I'm going to click on this V, which breaks the tangent. Now I hit F right there to focus. Now I can marquee select so that this dotted line and handle are selected, and middle mouse click and drag up. And what we want is we want this to arc, be relatively flat up top and then come down and get steeper and steeper as we get closer to the bottom. This means it's going to move slow at first and then quicker and quicker until it hits the bottom. If I were to drag this up too far, what's going to happen is the ball is going to gain elevation before it drops, which would look bizarre, right? We don't want that. So I'll undo that. So we don't want to move it up too far. We just want to kind of get it looking something like this. Let's do the same thing to this other side. Something like this. And let's see what that looks like. All right, much better, right? We have proper ease in and ease out. So that's great. Next, we want to get squash and stretch. So we're going to make this a bit unrealistic, a bit cartoony, right? So that when it gains speed, it stretches, and when it hits the ground, it squashes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this top squash stretch control, hit W, and move it down. I don't want to squash it all the way down as if it's a water balloon, okay? I'm going to squash it, maybe something like this. Let's look at this number. Let's say a nice round number, so negative 1.2, 1.2, right? And then I'm on this control, and I can key it here, so key selected. Now that I've done that, however, notice that if I go to frame 1, see it is still squashed here. So on frame 1, it needs to be 0, key selected, right? And then on frame 30, it also needs to be 0, key selected. Let's go ahead and marquee select these keys. Remember, this must be selected. Right now, these are in linear tangents. I'm going to select these and change them to spline by clicking on this right here, this button. All right. Let's also go to curves, pre-infinity cycle, curves, post-infinity cycle. All right, so we have it now so that the ball, when it hits the ground, it's completely squashed. However, on its way to the ground, it's right. It starts squashing on its way, and really it needs to be stretching before it hits the ground. So what we're going to do is go to the point before it hits the ground. So at 15, it's at 0, right? Let's use this view. 14, it's up here. Let's go to this point and bring it to where it will be its max stretchiness, right? So I'm going to select that same control, right? The one that does this. And I'm not going, let's try, let's see, if I go up, let's try positive 1.2, right? So here I'm on frame 14. I will key it. Frame 15. Let's try frame 16. Sorry. Let's try positive 1.2. And right click, key selected. Let me get something that looks like this. Let's select these keys and also spline them. And let's take a look over here. Okay, so we're starting to look better, but we're stretching really quickly, and we need to change that. Okay, so we can change that by adjusting the spacing. Notice that when we play this, it squashes for a single frame, right? And that's good. That'll communicate energy. We may not see it as the viewer, but we'll feel it, right? And that's an important principle. All right, so let's start by selecting this key over here, and let's go ahead and flatten it by clicking right here. We want this to ease into the stretch, not to just start stretching immediately. So let's take the end one as well and flatten it. Let's grab both of these top keys and break their tangents. Remember, it's this V. If you hover over it, it says break tangents. I'm going to select this key right here by marquee selecting over it, this tangent, and middle mouse clicking down. So now we really start off slow and then we accelerate into that stretch, right? Same thing over here. Let's select this one and we're going to stretch immediately and then ease out of that stretch once we get near the top. All right, so in the end, I've got something that looks like this, right, for this control. Let's go ahead and play the animation and see what it looks like now. Okay, much, much better. You know, it's definitely exaggerated, so there's some charm to it, but it's not so much so that it looks like a water drop or a water balloon or something like that, right? Surface tension is important. All right, this is going to be a looping animation, right? So by the time the video ends, it'll be back where it started and it'll just keep going and going. However, if you're making a looping animation, whether for a bounce or for a walk cycle or something like that, we typically want to have at least 3 repetitions before the video ends, okay? This will help depending on, you know, the viewer and what they're viewing your video on, right? So they can see that it loops without having to rely on whatever software they're using for it to loop. So because we set up our curves, and we can just double check by selecting all of this, going curves, pre-infinity, cycle, right? Curves, post-infinity, cycle. If I want this to repeat 3 times, I can change this to 90, right? And because those curves are on and view infinity is checked, if I hit play here, it's going to keep bouncing even though we don't have keys over here, right? Because the infinity is turned on. So it'll just bounce forever. But this sets up our video to be 3 seconds long. Let's go ahead and adjust the settings. So I'm going to come over here. Let's see. We're going to create a playblast, right? Which is going to be the video. A playblast is just a quick render to show off your animation without going through all the render settings. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off this poly count. So I'm going to go to display, heads up display, poly count. Let's make a floor. So I'll make a plane and scale it up. I'm going to turn the grid off by clicking on this. And let's turn on this screen space ambient occlusion and multi-sample, the anti-aliasing. So I'll click on that. And then I'm not concerned about lights or anything. All right, so I've turned the grid off and I've turned on anti-aliasing and I've made a little plane. You can see that when this gets close to the floor, a little shadow appears. That's kind of nice. That's from the ambient occlusion that we turned on. So we want to make sure our camera sees the entire animation. All right, so I'm going to play through the whole thing. There's a lot we can do here, but let's just keep it simple. All right, so something like this is fine. I'm going to right click on the timeline. Right click. Right here is Playblast. Don't just click on Playblast. Instead, we're going to click on the option box next to Playblast. Here, I turned off Show Ornaments. We're going to keep View on. AVI is good. Quality, set this to 100. Display size. Just keep it from window. You could do custom, or you could go to your render settings. And I believe the video tutorial inside the modules shows you how to do that if you want to do that. Scale, let's change this to 1. And then we need to click on this Save to File. And I'm going to click on Browse, and I'll name it and save it. Once I've chosen the name, then I will go down and hit Play Blast here. It's going to run through really quickly to render it, and then It's going to open it up immediately, or it should, as well as it should save it to wherever you chose to save it. Now if I hit play, you can see here's the animation, right? If you're in Windows and it's using this terrible default viewer, you can click on these three dots and click repeat, and you can see now we've got the animation. All right, so this is what you would submit. Feel free to go ahead and submit the Maya scene as well, but you must have the playblast, okay? All right, hopefully this helps, and I'll see you in the next one.